Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermin Sheikh.
In a speech later today, President Obama is expected to lay out a U.S. foreign policy approach that avoids large wars like Iraq and Afghanistan and shifts instead to partnering with countries on counterterrorism efforts. This comes as the New York Times reports the Obama administration launched a program last year to train, quote, homegrown African counterterrorism teams in Libya, Niger, Mauritania, and Mali. Just last week, the United States also deployed a battalion of 80 Marines to Nigeria to help search for the nearly 300 missing schoolgirls there. Meanwhile, on Tuesday, the group responsible for the kidnapping, Boko Haram, attacked a Nigerian military base and killed more than 30 people in the state of Yobe, not far from where the militants killed 59 students at a boarding school in February. All of this follows a nearly year-long military offensive that critics say strengthened the group and made it a threat to security in the whole region.
On Tuesday, Nigeria's Chief of Defense Staff, Air Marshal Alex Bade, said the military now knows where the abducted girls are being held, but he ruled out using force to rescue them for fear of endangering their lives.
The good news for the girls is that we know where they are, but we cannot tell you. Okay, we cannot come and tell you military secrets here. Just leave us alone. We are working. We will get the girls back.
Meanwhile, Nigerians in the capital city of Abuja continue to call for more to be done to secure the release of the schoolgirls abducted by Boko Haram. This is Musa Rafsanjani with the civil society group.
Now, the speculation about unknown where those girls are is now put to rest now, since the army have confirmed that they have discovered where they are. So we are happy with this development. The next stage is we want to see how the army could help to rescue this girl safely and alive and bring them back to their parents. That's what we expect the Nigerian army to do. And if they do that, surely they will restore confidence on Nigerians and the international community.
Well, for more on the situation in Nigeria and the newly revealed U.S. program to train so-called homegrown African counterterrorism teams in Libya, Niger, Mauritania, and Mali, we're joined by Dayo Olupade. She's a Nigerian-American journalist and author of the new book, The Bright Continent: Breaking Rules and Making Change in Modern Africa. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you with us. Talk about the latest.
You know, I think just looking at those clips and hearing folks express confidence in the Nigerian government, the Nigerians' military's ability to rescue these girls rang a bit false to me. I think this has been a problem for upwards of 5 years with respect to Boko Haram. And earlier in this debacle, the Nigerian government claimed that they had found the girls. So unless there's really some sort of hard evidence that they really have managed to track the girls down and they really do have the capacity and the willingness to rescue them, I would take some of these assertions with a grain of salt. And I think in general that's been one of the more frustrating elements of this dynamic where, the most basic definition of a state is to have a monopoly on violence and monopoly on force. And the Nigerian state, not just in northeast Nigeria, but throughout, has presided over a feeling of insecurity in the part of many citizens, economic insecurity, educational insecurity, and certainly sort of physical insecurity, particularly in the neglected areas in these regions that border Niger and Chad, where you're seeing a lot of these attacks take place, beyond the police attack in Abuja this week, but just, more than 1,500 people have been killed this year by Boko Haram. So it's a real problem that they have not managed to get a handle on.
And many commentators suggest, in fact, that Nigerian military and security forces operations, in fact, bolstered the group Boko Haram from 2009 to the present. Could you say a little about that and how that happened?
Right. I mean, the incentives simply are not aligned. I think the Nigerian military spends a lower percentage of its federal budget on military policing than almost any of the other countries in West Africa. And this is, ironically, in a country where the military has been, is enormous compared to its neighbors, does a lot of policing on behalf of the African Union all throughout the continent. And so the soldiers are underpaid. What's more, the soldiers, at least some of them, are predominantly Muslim. and some subsection of those soldiers are also part of the ethnic group that makes up Boko Haram. So when I say the incentives are misaligned, it is not always clear where the allegiance lies between the military group, a religious sort of community, and an ethnic community. And I think, you know, looking at the Times piece that was about the American effort to engage soldiers in sub-Saharan Africa and to train them, the problem that happened in Libya that was discussed in that article was one where the incentives were not aligned, where it was not clear to which community the soldiers were actually pledging allegiance. And I think you see that replicated in other regions where the U.S. has attempted to make these kind of training efforts, where it really does require a lot of trust and a lot of capacity building. And in Nigeria, certainly, there are complicated political incentives and complicated ethnic, religious dynamics that make it such that the Boko Haram threat has been somewhat neutralized. What do you think needs to happen in Nigeria right now in terms of these schoolgirls? You know, I think it's a really difficult issue. I think, as I mentioned, you have more than 1,500 people who have been killed by Boko Haram this year. Since 2009, the number leaps. And what's really more frustrating is that we don't necessarily... This is a different situation than a bombing. It's a kidnapping. It's a hostage situation. And the position of both the Nigerian government and the American government and most governments around the world is that you do not negotiate with terrorists. And they've been, at first, there was kidnapping without an ask. It was just sort of a nihilistic act in which these girls were taken overnight. And then suddenly there was an ask for a prisoner exchange, where folks who had been imprisoned by the Goodluck Jonathan administration were asked to be set free. And that deal, as I understand it, sort of evaporated in the last week. And so now I do think the United States, for what it's worth, is a useful partner for this kind of complicated and delicate hostage situation. I think Nigerian forces and many forces across the continent may not have the kind of the training, the intelligence, the sophistication, the personnel, and the weaponry to enact you know, the kind of extraction that we think would be necessary in this case. So the U.S. has sent helicopters and they've sent drones, as we do, to try and deal with the situation. And, you know, I will wait and see. I mean, I don't know. It's not a hopeful situation. Hostage situations rarely are. But certainly the world community's attention to the issue, the fact that it's become a kind of global cause, certainly allows for more transparency and more care than might have been shown, you know, in the weeks before it became public or globally public. And so in that case, I hope for something like a resolution soon.
Could you say a little bit more about the group Boko Haram? It started in 2009 in Nigeria, but it's now spread to some neighboring countries, Chad and Niger, etc. How many people are in the group? What is their constitution, their goal? If you could say a little about that.
Yes. Well, Boko Haram, I mean, we don't have exact numbers. I think the most important thing to know about Boko Haram is that it is an extreme manifestation of a kind of shared frustration among many young people all across sub-Saharan Africa, right? I mean, Boko Haram is a terrorist group, but a terrorist group that was initially driven by a sense of disenfranchisement, a sense of disinvestment, a sense of being on the periphery of a central government that wasn't taking care of it. A lack of employment opportunities also drove this. And that's something that you see replicated across sub-Saharan Africa, which is why the rise of Boko Haram has been so dangerous, because it's the kind of thing that the International Labor Organization tracks youth employment statistics. It's all over the world the highest it's been since they started, you know, taking these measurements. And so the combination of disenfranchisement, religious fundamentalism, and in the wake of the invasion in Libya, arms floating around across the Sahara to the south, in Mali, in Niger, in Chad, and now in northern Nigeria, you have just a really dangerous combination. And so Boko Haram was an Islamist group that, again, the name is often misconstrued. It's not that it's not anti-religion, or sorry, anti-Western, but it's mostly about the Western-educated elites who ran Nigeria for many years and who disenfranchised the north of Nigeria, which still has high rates of poverty, high rates of illiteracy, high rates of unemployment. It has since 2009, as a result of the Nigerian government's overcorrection, they killed the leader in a sort of a very bloody and public fashion, and killed, more than 700 folks. It was a very it was a crackdown that radicalized the group beyond what we had seen in the past. And so since then, it's been, just one series of attacks after another, and in a part of Nigeria that is incredibly porous, and lots of weapons infiltrate the area. And so it's a really difficult problem to solve. The root causes, of course, are just the same things you see everywhere, which is underemployment, poverty, idleness, lack of education.
We're talking to Dayo Olopade, who has written a new book. It's called The Bright Continent, Breaking Rules and Making Change in Modern Africa. We're also joined by Democracy Now! Video stream by Carl Levin, assistant professor at America University School of International Service, author of the forthcoming book, Dictators and Democracy in African Development, The Political Economy of Good Governance in Nigeria. Last week wrote an op-ed for the Christian Science Monitor, headlined 6 Ways to Bring Back Our Girls in Nigeria. Welcome as well to Democracy Now!, Carl. Can you talk about what are those 6 ways, but also whether you see what's happening now, the crisis being used to further militarize Africa?
Great. Thanks for having me on the show, Amy. Well, I wrote this op-ed with one of the Bring Back Our Girls organizers because we felt like that the response to the kidnapping of the girls was becoming politicized, actually on both sides of the Atlantic, and that there were some really important and urgent steps that could be taken right now that didn't require new laws or expensive new policies or even large-scale international cooperation. One idea was to establish what we described as solidarity schools in the North, and that is, in addition to these girls who have been kidnapped, there are tens of thousands of girls who would like to go to school, but it's too dangerous for them or too complicated for them. And so we proposed this idea of solidarity schools in the northeastern states where they could go to nearby places that are safer, and that this would also facilitate national integration. One of the wealthiest men in Africa, Dangote, has proposed a similar idea recently. Also, we proposed that the political parties who are gearing up for a major election next year in February 2015 could simply invite more women to run for office. In some parts of the country, there are actually no women who are office holders. For example, in the Northeast, in the 6 northeastern states in 2011, not a single woman was elected to state assemblies. A third issue was the widespread problem of internally displaced persons and now refugees. And this is not solely a problem to be blamed on Boko Haram, although Boko Haram certainly bears the brunt of this problem, but it's also because of the government's heavy-handed response to Boko Haram. As they say in Africa, when the elephants fight, the grass suffers. And this is the situation. The Nigerian Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, just a couple of days ago, outlined that there are hundreds of thousands of people who have been displaced. And this is a problem that has been neglected somewhat by the international community, and on the domestic front within Nigeria really needs an urgent and politically neutral humanitarian response. So those were some of the ideas that we were outlining. The last one that I'll just mention briefly, because it's very relevant to development since yesterday, is that the government could do much more to coordinate its information and simply hold a press conference every day. The Nigerian government, since yesterday, has not even sent consistent signals about whether it's negotiating through back channels or otherwise with Boko Haram.
And Carl Levin, you were in Nigeria when these girls were abducted?
That's correct. I was